Hello everyone, welcome back.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you.
You can start whenever you want.
Okay. All right. Hi everyone. Nice to see you again today. Hi. So maybe just for people who are still dripping in, we're just going to start with a little motivation to focus on mind, to reconnect with all the aspects in ourselves that we already have acknowledged, that we know of, that we would like to shine. We can connect with that. Living to the fullest as much as we can. And so that we can get the best out of this session. Yesterday I mentioned that when we bring all our energy to the present moment, sometimes there are thoughts that think, oh no, but I have to think about that. I have to keep thinking about that because I have to find a solution for this problem and I have to find a solution for that problem. But if we bring that energy back to the present moment and focus on and connect with all the goodness and all the wisdom that we have inside us, then the next moment will arise and the next moment will arise there where you need to resolve the problem. And then you have all your power with you in order to do so. If you are trying to solve the problem from tomorrow with the thoughts of today, it's not going to work, right? Because your body is here in the present moment. The problem is there in the future. So your power is here with the present moment. So we need to bring all the energy here. Does it mean I can't think about my problems? No, you can think about your problems, but not in the sense of, that your mind is already there, imagining what is going to happen, imagining the worst case scenarios, and thinking how you need to prepare for that. You need to bring that energy to your body, and then you can think about it while having your energy in your body about what can you do best, but that is a different kind of thinking. So living life to the fullest means bringing the energy back. So that's why we start the session with just doing that for a couple of minutes. So give yourself some space and some time to find a posture in which you feel relaxed and at the same time alert. And it can be very helpful to go through the meditation posture, checking your pelvis, rolling it enough forward in order for the spine to straighten up naturally. Moving your awareness through your whole spine, feeling vertebrae by vertebrae, releasing the muscles around the vertebrae, allowing the energy to move from your sacrum all the way up to your neck and to the crown of your head, and even further than that. Your arms are relaxed. either in the meditation posture, the right hand on top of the left with the thumbs slightly touching each other, or you let them rest on your thighs or in your lap. The tongue is touching the palate. The head is bent forward a little bit. The jaws are relaxed. And try to generate a feeling of joy in your mind. Like this is your time. You have set aside this 1.5 hour time to think about, to reflect on, to learn about how to live life to the fullest. What a wonderful gift to yourself. And you are allowed to take every minute of that 1.5 hour for you, yourself alone. You do not have to take responsibility with respect to anybody else. This is your time. And it can feel very selfish, and that is okay, because we want, when we start living life to the fullest, we're going to be like a shining light. And that light is not going to stay inside, that is going to shine outside, touching each and every one that can see us. And so being fully present in this moment and during this session is the best thing you do. It is being wisely selfish. It is being selfish in a way that it has the greatest benefit to all sentient beings. And then set a motivation for yourself today. Why you are here, what you want to learn from it. Which issues are important for you. And then by setting that motivation, try to include other sentient beings as well. And you can do that in a manner of that whatever you're going to learn here for your own benefit, that you're going to share that to the best of your ability. That you're not going to keep it just for yourself. And then we can start with the session. Or we actually already started, no? We can continue with the session with the next part of the session. So I'll give a little recap on yesterday. When we spoke about the first two aspects of the first noble truth, which were impermanence and suffering. And so the reason that we looked into that is because We had said that in order to live life to the fullest, we need to be fully present. We need to bring our mind to the present moment. We need to connect. In order to do so, we need to connect with the reality of the present moment, right? Because we have a reality that is the living essence of everything. And then there is a reality that we create in our own mind, which is, we think it is a reality. For us, it is a reality, but it is what is happening just in the mind is a fantasy, is made up by us. And what we often do, what I think, maybe I should say all human beings, all sentient beings do, is that we mix what is arising in the mind, what is arising, the appearances in our mind, we mix them with reality itself. And then often we start to believe that what appears in our mind is the reality, or is a full representation of the reality as it is outside, as if they are the same. But they're two totally different things. And so one quality of the reality that is in our mind is that it is not about the moment right now. It is either in the future or it is in the past. And it uses certain qualities that do not exist in reality at all. When we are caught up in that idea of reality, which somehow reflects aspects of reality, but it is quite distorted, right? But we believe that that is actually how reality is. It is like we are with our feet off the ground, you know. It is as if we are floating in the world, as if we are not properly grounded, as if we do not have roots in the ground. And bringing the mind to the present moment, bringing it to the body, bringing it to the breath, bringing it to what we feel. We go back to the experience, and the experience always happens in the moment. So that is like we need that in order to be connected with reality, in order to have the mind in the present moment. The more we do that, then we can check if things really exist in the way that we thought they exist. And then we can slowly see the difference between what we experience and what we think about the experience. You know, because that mixture of appearance and reality itself, to us, they do not appear as two different things. It's one mixture. And it is very difficult in the beginning to pull them apart. Oh, this I was adding to what is happening, but this is actually what is really happening. Do you recognize what I'm saying? Sometimes it takes a while, you know, to see, you know, I don't know, in the beginning, I was quite a little bit insulted when I heard that I was fantasizing. And I was hallucinating. I thought, what are these Buddhists talking about? I know what reality is, you know. But looking back, I must say I was quite floating around. And I learned a lot from just doing mindfulness practice, sitting in the ground day after day after day, doing sitting meditation, walking meditation, sitting meditation, walking meditation. And I could see at a certain point, you know, but that was after 8 days, 10 days, like, oh my gosh, same story is going on in my mind. And I started to see like, oh, I believe that what is going on in my mind is actually going to happen. And because it didn't happen yesterday, I changed the story a little bit with the thought that maybe then today it's going to happen. And I really believed that is what reality is, you know. So that was a huge shock when I thought, oh my gosh, these are just my thoughts. This has nothing to do with reality, you know. And then I learned to I mean, I still do it, right? Because that is how the mind works. But to more and more challenge your appearances and your beliefs and your, what you project onto reality might not be what somebody else projects onto reality, and both might not exist at all. So doing a checkup, like, is that really there? Can I see that? Can I hear that? Did somebody say that? Even if somebody said that, did they really mean this and this with that? We need to check. So bringing the mind to the present moment is a very good first step to connect with reality. And so the reality Oops, unmute to start speaking. Unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Venerable, we can hear you.
What happened?
You were kicked out, I don't know, maybe.
Right. I was
Yes.
talking about the work that they're doing on the canals. I think they must have disconnected my internet for a minute. But I mentioned that if you would not do anything, everything will start falling apart. Right? This is the nature of everything. If we want to keep something beautiful, we have to put work in it. If we don't do it, it will naturally fall apart. So that means that nothing lasts, and that everything changes moment to moment. Being in the nature of suffering means that all our experiences are in the nature of suffering, and that includes not only the painful experiences, but also all the pleasant experiences. And I mentioned that a pleasant experience is just the moment between the end of one type of suffering and the beginning of another type of suffering. And it is really worthwhile to take any example, that when you think, okay, warm and cold, when I'm too warm, what am I doing? I'm going to find a way to cool down. For instance, I've been sitting in the sun in the summer at Tushita, and it's getting really, really hot. I go into the shade. I stay in the shade. After some time, it starts getting really chilly. I'm getting cold. I'm suffering from the cold. And then there is a moment that I get up and I think, oh, I'm going to sit in the sun. And the first moment in the sun is that total relief of the end of suffering of sitting in the cold. And that feels so pleasurable, so blissful, so nice. And then I stay in the sun, and that pleasure starts to diminish. And at a certain point, I start feeling hot. And I start feeling uncomfortable being hot. And I start to suffer from being hot. And then there is a point that I say, wow, now I need to get up and move into the shade, right? The moment I move into the shade, I have this huge relief, which is the end of the suffering of being in the sun. And it is the beginning of the suffering of being in the shade. And we can do that with anything. You know, when I'm sitting at a certain point, I can feel like, wow, I get a little bit stiff or lazy or whatever. I need to get up. And, you know, the moment that you get up, you feel like, this relief, and you start walking. But we all know that we can't keep walking, right? There is a point when we walk that we think, you know, now I've walked enough, or I'm feeling tired, or I want to sit down. And the moment we sit down, we feel the relief again. And so it is very good to contemplate this with many different experiences. You know, the pleasure of eating. Think about that. The pleasure of eating is much bigger when we are hungry, when we postpone the eating a little bit. And then we get hungry. And at a certain point, we suffer from the hunger, from the not eating. And we start eating, and it's like, wow, this is so nice. And then we keep eating, and the pleasant feeling slowly starts to diminish. And if we would keep eating, it starts to become suffering, and we get pain in our stomach. Right? And we can, so if you think like this, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, all these pleasures, they are actually experienced when we stop one time of suffering. And if we would keep indulging in these pleasures, they would all change into suffering. And this is what the Buddha meant with life is in the nature of suffering. All the experiences that we have are in the nature of suffering, because the pleasure that we have is not stable, it is changeable, and it's pleasure is only pleasure in a certain moment. It is, for instance, if I eat ice cream and I experience pleasure, that pleasure is only certain moments pleasurable. It is when I keep eating ice cream becomes unbearable. So it is not eating ice cream that gives me the pleasure. It is the end of the suffering that contributes a lot to the experience of pleasure. It is only when I eat ice cream under certain conditions that it gives me pleasure. Ice cream does not always give me pleasure. True. If the pleasure from ice cream would be real pleasure, then we would always experience pleasure when we eat ice cream, no matter what the circumstances are. And we know that that is not true. If the pleasure from eating ice cream would be real pleasure, then the more ice cream we eat, the more pleasure we would experience. That is when something is real, you know, then the more we have, the more pleasure we should have. And we know that that is also not true. So therefore, all the experiences in our life are in the nature of suffering. And I shortly mentioned the all-pervasive suffering, which means that we have taken a body under the influence of karma and afflictions. Karma and disturbing emotions are attachment. And because we have a body, our body produces disturbing emotions, right? Our body produces attachment and aversion to certain objects, to certain people, to certain things. The body produces that. The body is produced by afflictions, and the body produces afflictions. Due to that, we take rebirth again. And so, being in this body that constantly produces afflictions, there is a lack of freedom. I cannot choose how I react to certain experiences. That comes naturally, that comes automatically. I'm programmed like that. I'm conditioned like that. And so even if I want to change my life, you know, that conditioning is there. I can do therapy however long I want. That conditioning, I cannot change that with therapy. It is too subtle, it is too deep-seated, it is too... in order to realize the nature of reality so that we do not react anymore from our disturbing emotions, requires a very subtle mind. It requires a lot of study, it requires a lot of thinking, and then it requires a lot of concentration in order to realize the nature of reality directly. So it is not easy to change that. It is underlying under every experience that we have, that reactivity. And so that is part of the all-pervasive suffering. The reason that we do this reactive, reacting with aversion and reacting with attachment, is due to our ignorance. And so today we will go deeper into that. So when we are encouraged by the Buddha to face the truth of suffering, the first noble truth, we don't like it, right? Because suffering is something that we don't like. By definition, suffering is something that we don't like. And then the Buddha, when we start connecting with impermanence, we need to let go of things that we like. We need to see a nature that we find difficult to be with because it is uncertain and it is changing all the time, and we're not sure how to adapt so quickly to that changing nature. And if we start connecting with the nature of our experiences and see that everything is in the nature of suffering, we also do not like that, right? It is an unpleasant truth that the Buddha is confronting us from the beginning. And so some teachers say, well, for Westerners, they don't like to hear that. You know, you shouldn't start with the first noble truth. You start with emptiness so that people know that the suffering is not going to be forever, that there are so many possibilities for changing this. You know, Westerners need to know that before they can hear the first noble truth. But I hope you all know a little bit about emptiness, and that I can just do start with the first noble truth. Living life to the fullest, bringing the mind to the body, bringing the mind to the present moment requires facing what is there, requires confronting ourselves with the nature of reality, which is that it is impermanent and suffering by nature. Normally, when there are unpleasant things that we experience, you know, what we do is we move away from it, right? So our nature is not pleasant, so we move away from it. Or we think, how can I change that? You know? There are many Buddhist practitioners who, and I'll put my finger up as well, because I can see the tendency in myself also on a regular basis. How can I change the situation that I'm going to feel better? You know, how can I change samsara so that I do not experience all that suffering? Samsara is never going to change. Samsara is always in the nature of suffering. No matter what I'm going to do, no matter how beautiful community I bring together, no matter how wonderful we work together, no matter the suffering is, the nature of suffering is always part of, you know, what is there. I cannot change that. So tomorrow we will talk more about when we react with aversion and we want to withdraw or we want to change it, how we can be with things without being triggered in that aversion. But I want to look today more into things that we see as reality, which in actuality are not there. So we see reality as permanent, which is in actuality not there. We see reality as being, and especially our body, as being pure and being the producer of happiness, which in actuality is not there. So then today we're going to look at the second two aspects of the First Noble Truth, which are empty and which are selfless. And before I go there, I don't know, impermanence and suffering is intellectually very easy, I think, easy to understand, but it's not so easy to practice. And because it is always there, it is something that we could always try to connect with. Any free minute that we have, we could think about impermanence and the nature of suffering. And so if you feel like, oh, you know, I think that is really going to be helpful to bring my mind more in the present moment, what you could do is you could make several resting points during the day. You know, sometimes that you say, for instance, when I wake up, and then after breakfast, and then when I go to work, when I sit behind my computer, or when I start my work, I first take 2 minutes to reflect on that. And then when I have my break, my coffee break, I take 2 minutes before that, 2 minutes after that, whatever. Wherever you can fill in, wherever you have a few minutes time, you could say, these moments I take a rest and I try to connect with the present moment, with my body, with my breath, you know. So even if you close your eyes and you connect with your body in the present moment, and then maybe you feel your breath going in and out. And then you contemplate that your body today, even in this very moment, is different from your body in the previous contemplation that you did. And it's going to be different from your next contemplation, from the body in your next contemplation. So the body that we have right now, is there only one moment? That body is changing all the time. The body that we experience in this moment has never been there and will never come back. Just connecting with that truth. And so when we do that and we think about a little bit about impermanence, we don't judge ourselves and we are very gentle with ourselves. And it is maybe you can find, you know, one sentence that can help you. For instance, you can think, this will all pass. You know, when there is something really difficult, you think this will pass. This will pass, no matter what. This cannot stay. Nothing can stay in this world. It will all pass. Any problem that you have, any difficult person that is in your life, it will all pass. And if you find it difficult because it feels like it is, whatever is happening and is unpleasant is totally controlling your life, you can even lift yourself a little bit out of your life and you envision this life within the context of many lifetimes. And you think, even if this would stay with me the rest of my life, you know, it's not going to go with me after this life. There is going to be an end to this. And this life, compared to the big, big, big picture, is just one tiny lifetime. It's not going to make such an impact on the whole. What seems to be very important to me right now might not be so important when I see it from above, into the context of many lifetimes. And so use impermanence and the nature of suffering however it works for you. And just reflect on that. Give yourself 1-2 minutes at a time to reconnect with that again and again and again. I think when you do this 6-7 times a day, you will see your days changing. You will see your mind changing. You will become more real. You will become less, how to say, in my horoscope it says you're very idealistic. And I thought, so what is there wrong with that? Isn't that good, that you strive for your ideals? But if the ideals are a kind of dreaming away into fantasies that can never ever be fulfilled, then it's maybe not so beneficial to be so idealistic. I think being idealistic is fine, but bring it to the present moment. And what can I do today in order to fulfill these ideals? Don't have it just as a dream that you're all the time talking about. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do this and this and this? Well, we are right here. How can you go from here to there? Do these kind of reality checks in order to ground yourself. So now a little bit about empty and selfless. And if you all have heard some Buddhist teachings before, haven't you? So you know that emptiness is a huge topic, and selflessness is part of that emptiness. And in the time of the Buddha, when he was teaching, he was, of course, surrounded by all Indian philosophers, right? He was growing up as an Indian prince. He was surrounded by many yogis. There were many schools of Indian philosophy, like the Samkhya school and the Vaisheshika school, and many different kinds of, they all had their own ideas about what the self is, how the self exists, and how the self relates to the 5 aggregates, or to the body and the mind. And what most of these schools presented was that the self is permanent, and that the self is partless and independent of the body and the mind. So some would say, that what we are feeling as the self is not really the self. That is just, some people also nowadays, you hear them talk about that's the lower self. But then we have a higher self, which is Atman, which has very different qualities, which is permanent, partless, and independent. What we need to realize with our little self is that we are actually this big self. And once we realize that, the little self will drop away and we dissolve into oneness with the nature of all phenomena. So although there are very good aspects in the Indian philosophy, what the Buddha said is that self that is permanent, partless, and independent doesn't exist like that. Right? So by saying the self is empty, he said the self is empty of a permanent, partless, independent self. Refuting with that the non-Buddhist scholars, refuting with that the Indian philosophers who held onto such a self. So the Buddha says, when the aggregates are impermanent, the self cannot be permanent. When the aggregates have many parts, the self cannot be partless. And when the self The self depends upon the aggregates and therefore cannot exist independent of the aggregates. Right? If we have a body and a mind that we call self, and we can say the body and the mind are impermanent, if we call that self, then that self needs also to be impermanent. If I have a body and a mind that is impermanent, and I have the feeling there is a self living in me, and I'm going to say that self is permanent, you're going to have trouble positing even a relationship between the body, the mind, and the self. How can something that is permanent relate to something that is impermanent? How can something that is permanent make a connection with something that is impermanent? The nature of connection is that as soon as there is a connection, there is change, there is interaction. Something that is permanent cannot interact. If it would interact, it would change. And if it would change, it would not be permanent. So sometimes the view that we have such a permanent self is shown with an example of having a pea in a glass pot. You know, this pea has nothing to do with the glass pot except that it is inside there. But the pea does not exchange. The pea doesn't change from being in the glass pot. The pea will change due to impermanence, but not of being in the glass pot. Sometimes we have this feeling, right, that we have this self, as if this self is sitting somewhere deep inside us, like the pea in the glass pot. Like we can feel. Some people call it a soul. Some people, I don't know, you can give it different kinds of words, but it feels like there is a distinguished entity there that is not changing, that is always the same, that is always with you, that is your deepest self, that knows who you are, that maybe you feel connected with higher beings or with a God, or that is who you are. And so what Buddhism says is we have to check if the way that self appears, whether or not it can actually exist like that. So the Buddha doesn't say that self is not there. The Buddha says the way you feel it exists, it might not exist like that. We need to investigate. All right, is that clear? If you have any questions coming up, please feel free to put them in. And so then the permanent, partless, independent self is the most core self that can be posited. And then there are more subtle forms of self that can be posited, that the Buddha said, no, these selves also do not exist like that. For instance, there is what we call a substantially self-sufficient self, substantially existent self-sufficient self. That self seems to be the owner of the body and the mind, or the governor, the one who's ruling the body and the mind, the one who's making the decisions, the one who is in charge, the one who is in control. And it seems like that self has different characteristics from the body and the mind. You know, when we say my body, my mind, that I appears as something different from the body and the mind. That appearance is called the self-sufficient, substantially existent self. and it appears like an entity that is in charge. Right? And the Buddha said, such an entity, if we start investigating, we find that such an entity doesn't exist. And so by saying that, he refuted all the Indian schools of thought. And then within Buddhism, especially within, I don't know about other types of Buddhism, but within Tibetan Buddhism, there are different philosophical schools. They all refute an independent self, because all the Buddhist schools, they believe that all things are impermanent, including the self. So the self is impermanent. All the schools that hold on to a permanent self are refuted by the Buddhists. The self is impermanent because it arises from causes and conditions. It depends upon causes and conditions. And then within Buddhism, there is a lot of debate about how the self exists, right? They all agree it doesn't exist as a permanent entity, it is impermanent. But then how does it exist? And so the lower schools, they say the self exists truly. Some say it exists inherently. And what that means is that, according to the higher school, it means that when you start looking for the self within the collection of the body and the mind, you can find something that you say, that is the self. You know, just as that we feel the soul, you know, the soul is myself. I can find that when I look for it, you know, because I can find the soul. So in Buddhism, they say, some schools, they say the collection of the body and the mind is the self. That is the self. Another school says in general, we talk about 6 consciousnesses within Buddhism, but they add 2 consciousnesses, and they say the 8th consciousness, or the alaya, is the self. And another school says, no, actually it is the mental consciousness, which is the self, the one who is thinking, and maybe not the coarse thinking, but the subtle thinking. That is the self. Right? So it is not, so there is a lot of layers of coarseness within how they posit the self. And if we go to the most subtle school of thought in Tibetan Buddhism, they say that when we look within, when we look within the body and the mind, we cannot find anything that we can call the self. There is nothing to find. Then how does the self exist? You know, we might think, oh my gosh, there is no self. Well, there is no self to find, but that doesn't mean that the self doesn't exist, because the self does exist in dependence on the body and the mind. So the self is a different phenomenon from the body and the mind, but they arise together and they dissolve together. And whatever qualities the body and the mind have, also the self has. Why is that? Because the self is that which is imputed upon the body and the mind. Independence on the body and the mind, which is physical and which is consciousness. This is a collection of something that is physical and consciousness. Independence on that, I impute the name self, or I. I call it the self or the I. That is all the self is. I call it the self. Within the body and the mind, there is nothing that is the self, but I call it the self. And so according to this school of thought, all phenomena exist like that. There is a collection of parts, like for the self, that means there is a body and a mind. And in dependence on that, I give it a name. There is a collection of many things that are not self, and I call that a self. If I look at a car, then I can say there are many parts that are not car. They're coming together in a certain way, put together, they function in a certain way, and I call that a car. But every part of the car is not car. When I put the car together, all the parts, this is not a car, this is not a car, the door is not a car, the wheel is not a car, the gear is not a car, nothing is the car. So in dependence on all that, I call it a car. And so some schools, they say then the car is an other powered phenomenon, which means it is powered, empowered, due to many things that are not itself. So we give the self a lot of power, right? Myself decides what I'm going to say. Myself decides when I'm going to get up. Myself decides what I'm going to do. But actually, I exist out of all kinds of things which are not self. The thoughts that would like to do something are not the self. Even the intention that is going to do it is not the self. But in my thinking, I think I'm going to do that. I want to do that. So Buddhism says with the way we use the way we see the self, we have added a lot of qualities to the self which are actually not there. We have given the self a lot of power. We have given the self a lot of yeah, maybe power is the right word. You know, it as if the self can do many things, but in actuality, if you start investigating what the self is, then you find a name given to the body and the mind, and that's it. And so getting more and more understanding about the discrepancy between how things appear to us, how the self appears to us, and how it exists in actuality. The better we understand that, the less power we give to this self that we believe in at the moment, which is, you know, in itself, I don't mind if anyone believes in the self, but in dependence on that self, anger arises when we experience something that we don't like. Attachment arises when we see something that we want to have. Jealousy arises when we see that somebody has something that we would like to have. All kinds of disturbing emotions. And then on the top of that, we have all these thoughts arising, these stories in our mind saying, oh, but I want to have that. And why do they have that? And I deserve it more. And total stories, total constructs. And if they would make us happy, no problem, you know. But in general, they make us suffer. We suffer from that. We say, oh, I want to stop that thinking mind. My gosh, how do I shut it up? You know, well, this is how we can shut it up. Not by saying shut it up, not by suppressing anything, but by investigating that core self, which is the source of all what arises in the mind. How that really exists, how it appears to us, and then we do reality check. Does it exist like that? So in the meditation today, we're going to have a little look. I had a little bit more information, but It's not necessarily. Let me see if you have questions on this. Maybe I shook your. I hope I didn't shook you too much, that you're still here. Suhash, can you Pema, can you unmute him that he can ask a question?
Sure, Venerable, yeah.
Oh, he already wrote something in the chat. Is that enough, Suhash? Can you please describe a little bit more on the self and anger and jealousy? So tomorrow I will talk about the mind of aversion and how to be with aversion. And so then we also can talk about anger. Anger, so jealousy, part of the jealousy is anger, right? When jealousy arises, there is anger in the jealousy and there is also attachment in the jealousy. Jealousy has both anger and attachment strongly. Anger on its own is, anger arises when we meet something that we don't like, something that we did not ask for, something that we don't want. Anger can arise when we have something, what we really like, and it is taken away from us. You know, we love our girlfriend so much and then she leaves us. Anger arises. Or she threatens to leave us. Anger arises. What was the other one? Being separated from what we like, getting something what we don't like, or not getting what we want. We desperately want to have something, you know, like a promotion or a new car or a new, and we just are not able to get it. You know, then also anger arises. Because when we do not get what we want, or we get something that we don't want, or we get separated from something that we love, we suffer. Very simple, we suffer. And when we suffer, anger is a force. If you start investigating what it is trying to do, it is trying to prevent you from suffering. But it is doing that in a way that is actually causing you suffering. But it appears as that what is going to help you to not suffer. It can appear as your protector. Does that make sense, Saj? Can you unmute him, Pema?
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm not aware. I didn't ask that question, ma'am. I think someone else did. I have a.
Oh, that's Sugat. I'm sorry. Yeah, that wasn't you. I already answered Sugat's question. You asked your question. Sorry.
Venerable, circling back, you did speak about the wind element and the rider. I hope I'm articulating it right and I'm paying enough attention. You spoke about how our attention is influenced by a wind element and there is a rider.
Did I do that in this course? No, I did that in another course.
I'm sorry for digressing a little bit, but I kept...
It's okay. That's okay. So what is your question about that?
Is the rider the consciousness, the awareness part of it?
Yes.
Which we are trying to reel the attention back in?
Well, you could say, I mean, when so Saj is talking, I think when I did opening the heart, I maybe have spoken about the wind.
It was discover your true nature.
Discover your true nature. Yes. Okay. So when we speak about discover our true nature, we spoke about the 3 levels of consciousness. There is a coarse level of consciousness, a subtle level of consciousness, and an extremely subtle level of consciousness. The coarse level of consciousness is normally connected to the coarse body. The subtle level of consciousness is normally connected to the subtle body, which refers to the chakras and the channels and the winds. And then the extremely subtle consciousness is connected to the extremely subtle wind. And what I said is that the extremely subtle wind and the extremely subtle consciousness, they relate to each other as a horse and the rider of the horse. So the horse is an analogy for the wind, the extremely subtle wind energy, and the rider for the extremely subtle consciousness. They always go together. They cannot be separated from each other. I mean, the horse and the rider, they can, but in terms of the consciousness and extremely subtle wind, they are one entity. They are compared to the rider and the horse in the sense that the wind is that which is moving, which is the horse, is that which is moving, and the consciousness is that which directs the mind where to go. So that is the rider. The rider just sits there directing the horse, and the horse is the one that is moving, right? This is the analogy. Can you got that, Suhas?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to go to the more coarse levels. So then we have the subtle level of the body and the subtle level of the mind. They are not necessarily connected with each other in the sense that we do not necessarily have any awareness of that nor how to use that. And then on the coarse level, the coarse mind and the coarse body, they can function totally disconnected from each other. They are together. The mind is somehow, always connected to the body. The moment we are not connected at all, actually we die. But on the coarse level, the mind can go everywhere, right? I can go to the past, I can go to the future, I can go to America, I can go to India, my mind can go anywhere, not being here. So although we're on the extremely subtle level, the mind and the body are always connected. On the coarse level, it's not necessarily like that. And so when we try to bring the mind to the body, you can visualize that you say to the rider, come on, get on your horse. It's much easier to move. It's much more efficient when you're on your horse. You're off your horse and you're trying to run on your own. There is no energy there. Your energy is with your horse. You can say that, but normally we do not use the analogy of the rider and the horse for the coarse body and the mind. I don't know if that makes sense, Suhas.
Yeah, it does, ma'am. Thank you. And can I ask another question? Or?
Yeah, very quick one, because many people are now raising their hand. So, yes. Tell me.
I'm fairly new to looking at the ways of how we are related to karma and how afflictions produce this body. And I also feel there is, and also the dance with death, awareness with death. And is it just lack of imagination? Because when I try to contemplate it, it's like when I cease to exist, what is there? And what about human agency? If I'm sure it's the ignorance and the mistaken way of looking at things, but with practice, does it get better?
Yes, it does. It does. When we are, I don't know, how long have you been practicing? Can you indicate that?
Just 2 years, man.
2 years. What my own experience is for myself, and that's the only thing that I can relate to, is that when I started to practice and I started to study, I didn't really understand much, I mean, I sat in teachings on emptiness, I understood nothing. And I came, but I felt something is happening, but I could not repeat one word. It took me maybe 8 years sitting in teachings before I could formulate my first question, but that says something about my own frozen brain. These concepts were so, from one side, they felt very familiar and they felt like they make a lot of sense. And on another level, on my coarse mind, I just could not get my thoughts in the right order to ask the right questions. I just could not get it formulated. So that has taken me a long period of time. So for you, you could think, sometimes you need to go deeper into a topic to get more feeling for it. Sometimes you need to first study other topics before you can go to that topic that you do not connect so much with. Sometimes, it's very difficult to say, not knowing you well, like what you need to do in order to get more understanding, more feeling, more connection. But I can relate to the fact that you say, I've been doing this for a couple of years and it doesn't make, these parts don't make any sense, No,
ma'am. Not that they don't make sense. It's like what I aspire to, and all the while, the grasping mind is, Alan Wallace talks about cognitive hyperactivity or cognitive deficit.
Yes.
All the while, the grasping mind is yelling, entertain us, or it's just like a dog with a leash, it's just running away.
Yes. So tomorrow we will talk about the mind that is running away, and the day after tomorrow we'll talk about that grasping mind, which is sometimes the same as the running away mind, right? So we'll go more into the detail of these minds. And then maybe we go from there. Maybe if you then, maybe questions come up, we can address them there. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Then Suget, I just answered your question. Is that all right?
Venerable, I had a related question.
Yeah.
I think you talked a little about self and suffering. Can you elaborate a little more on that? Or what I understood was, our focus on self and thinking that self is giving more importance to self is the cause of suffering. Is that the right interpretation?
It's not just the importance of self, but that is also part of it. But it is also the aversion that comes from when we suffer, and how much attention we give that, and how much we nourish that gives a lot of suffering. So I'm going to go again to tomorrow, because tomorrow we will talk about when things arise in the mind, we either react first with aversion or with attachment. So tomorrow I will talk about aversion, which is related to anger, which is related to suffering, and how we can be with that. And then I will also explain a little bit why we suffer so much. Holding on too strongly onto a self is, of course, the main thing. But then from there, delusions come, anger comes, attachment comes, all kinds of thoughts come. And if we then get caught up into that, we make it bigger and bigger and bigger.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay. Isadora. Pema, yes, thank you.
Thank you for taking the question. My question is a little bit about the horse and the rider analogy, because earlier in your talk you said that we're conditioned to react in a certain way, so we don't have the freedom, and we all have these. Supposedly everybody has slightly different habits and different karma. But is that the analogy also for that conditioning? So that subtle.
I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say. So normally the horse and the rider, they are used just for the extremely subtle mind and wind. Within this extremely subtle mind and wind, there is no conditioning. That is the only pure moment. This is the only pure, I mean, when the extremely subtle mind manifests, that is the only pure aspect of the mind where there is no conditioning.
I see. Okay, so they're completely opposite. I didn't, okay.
Right, and then when the body and the mind become more coarse, when we incarnate and we take a body and we start, our consciousness starts to connect with that coarse body. Even before that, the conditioning starts, you know, the learning process starts. And because our body is made out of karma and delusions, it is produced by karma and delusions. It is under the influence of karma and delusions, right? If something is produced by karma and delusions, it will be in the same nature as what it is produced by. So whatever karma and delusions produces is in the nature of karma and delusions. And it's ruled by karma and delusions. So our new body and mind, even as a little child, that is produced by karma and delusions, and therefore will already react under the influence of karma and delusions. So a little baby in the womb is already reacting to what it likes and what it doesn't like. Right? That's not something that we need to teach a child. They know it. When the mother is eating food that agitates the child will react, you know, and mom says, oh, I feel the baby moving. But maybe the baby has aversion to what is coming in the body, right? Or when there is beautiful music, then the mother can feel, oh, the baby is calming down. That is just, I experience something and I like it and I react to that with wanting more. Or I experience something which I do not like and I react with wanting to move away from that. Mm-hmm. This is something we do intuitively, right? You cannot stop that. You cannot, no matter where we are, that is what we are doing. And when we are in a condition when that gets triggered strongly, then the delusions will increase very strong. We might become very angry, we might become very greedy, we might become very needy. But it is not that we are needy, but due to the conditions, you know, in that moment, it can arise strongly in the mind.
Okay, and one short question, if I may. Other powered nature, is that the same saying imputed?
So what the one school, like the Chittamatra school, calls other powered natures is what the Prasangika school would call the object of imputation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so the object of imputation is other.
I think yes.
Okay.
That's other powered nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank
you.
Right.
All right. And then there was one more question of Julia. I'm going to look if I can do that today. Julia says, I have a question to something you said at the start. You said one should constantly check on one's own appearances, thoughts, and beliefs. I feel that by doing that, I sometimes have a hard time forming an opinion or take decisions, especially decisions for groups. So if you need to make decisions for groups or also for yourself, you know, I'm not sure if that is the time that you check your appearances. Someone gave me that advice, which was very helpful for me, so I passed that on. That person said, if you have to make a decision, I would say, how do I know what's the right decision? And then she said, you close your eyes and you wonder, what is the most beneficial thing for me to do? Or what is the most beneficial thing for the group to do? And that is what you go for. You know, we are all deluded. We all have appearances that are exaggerated. We all have appearances that are not in accordance with reality itself. and it's not that we're going to change that overnight, nor that we can't ever gonna get, we can change that when we do a lot of practice and a lot of study, but we are limited human beings, and we do not have to wait until we see reality as it is before we can make a decision. So we have to do it with the delusions, you know. So we do the very best we can. And by wondering what is most beneficial, I try to think, you know, I do not have to agree with the decision. I do not have to, it doesn't have to be my wish. But if I think what is most beneficial, I feel that I open up my mind and I connect with all the beings that I decide for. And I connect with all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that are abiding in space. And then whatever answer comes to me, I trust that that is not coming from my self-grasping mind, but that I surrender that to whatever is good for the whole. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. We did all the questions, right? Wonderful. Let's do a little meditation. A little meditation on the self. And I'm not gonna do the how we do that in the Gelugpa tradition, meditating on the self, negating the self, because I feel that in order to do that, we need to have much more information. But we can meditate on the self in other ways. Let me see where I have it. So take a few minutes to just settle your posture. And so having a self and having delusions and not being able to see reality as it is, you know, do not beat yourself up for that, or don't feel frustrated about that, or don't try to change it in the sense of, you know, I need to get rid of that, because we have been in this situation since beginningless time. We do not know ourselves without these delusions. We do not know ourselves without our ignorance. We cannot see reality in our present condition as it is. And you know, we have to somehow be okay with that. And especially when we are a perfectionist, we cannot stand it, that we can't see everything and understand everything. But I'm going to ask you to be patient with yourself and to just be grateful that we already have the thought that whatever is appearing to me is not necessarily how it truly is. That is already a fantastic thought. That thought can shred your whole cyclic existence, your whole samsara. So just start there and rejoice that you can think that. That's already fantastic. The way we believe in the self is something that we share with all human beings, with all animals, with most likely all the animals and all the beings in the other realms. We all have a self to which we contribute qualities and aspects that do not exist in actuality. And in dependence on that, we create a lot of suffering for ourselves, for others. And so it is not our fault that we have this delusion. But it is our merit that we are finding teachings that help us to understand the difference between what is really there and what is just an appearance. So then when you have found a posture in which you can meditate for 10, 15 minutes, call to mind your I, yourself. The one that you feel is in control. The one that decides. The one that suffers. The one that experiences joy. The identity, you, that you identify most with. It's like an entity residing in your body. Focus on that entity. And then we're just going to investigate a little bit. For instance, we say, I'm sitting here. I'm sitting. And then question yourself and say, who is the I that is sitting? Does that I exist as an entity? And if so, is this a separate entity from the body and mind? Or is it one with the body and mind? Or is it just a way of saying? And would we have to say it's not I am sitting, but the body is sitting? Just reflect on that. You don't have to come to any conclusions, but just wonder. And then we say, I'm breathing. Who is the I that is doing the breathing? Is there an I doing the breathing? Or is it just the breath is breathing? if you have the feeling that the I is doing the breathing, then how do you do that in all these moments that your I is busy with something else? Or in all these moments that the I is sleeping? And you say, I am sleeping. And who's doing the breathing while you sleep? And you can say, but I'm breathing while I'm sleeping. If the I is really doing the breathing, it will be very difficult for the I to also do the sleeping. Although there is nothing wrong with saying, I am meditating, I am sleeping, I am breathing, the feeling that we get with that is that there is an I that is in control of the sleeping, the breathing, the meditating. While in actuality, there is just sleeping, breathing, and meditating. Even when the I is out of the way, the breathing, the sleeping, and the meditating still happens. And if we look a little bit more into the mind, then we say, I'm angry, I am confused, I am loving, so also with this we can say, who is this I that is angry or confused or loving? Does that exist as an entity that we can point towards and say, that is the I that is angry, that is the I that is confused? And if you have a strong feeling of that I, is that I something that exists separate from the body, or is it one with the body? Or is it separate from the mind, or is it one with the mind? Or is it that anger arises in the mind, confusion arises in the mind, love arises in the mind, and then we say, I am that? Well, in actuality, it is just something that arises in the mind. It's not who you really are. So to get some space from these ideas, you could think, when anger arises in the mind, that anger is arising in the mind. I am not my anger. My mind is not the anger. Anger is just an emotion that arises in the mind and dissolves back into the mind. And the same you can do for confusion and also for love. These are aspects that arise in the mind due to causes and conditions, and they dissolve back into the mind. It is not what you really are. It is an aspect of you. It is not yourself. It is not your I. It is a quality that you can produce under the influence of causes and conditions. And we can apply this method also to deep-seated beliefs that we have. For instance, we can think about ourselves, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm not that. I'm not that. And then we can wonder, like, who is this I that is not good enough? Does it exist as an entity? And if so, is it something that exists separate from the mind? Or as being one with the mind? That I that feels that it is not good enough can appear as very solid, as something that is really there, as something that we should never show to anyone. The real I, we bury it. But what if it is just a habit that has grown over time, that we kept repeating again and again? But in actuality, there is no I that is not good enough. That I itself, being part of you, being a quality of you, the I doesn't exist like that. So when we discover that there is no entity that is sitting, there is no entity or self that is angry or not good enough, then whatever quality we contribute to this I will drop away. Think about that. If we can see that the I is not doing these things, not having these things, if the I is not that, if that I cannot exist like that, then whatever quality the I is doing or having will drop away as well, which means that the belief that we hold of ourselves will lose its power. And so we might need to repeat this meditation again and again, starting with the more superficial beliefs, like believing that there is a real I or a truly existent I that is sitting. Letting go of the identification with the disturbing emotions is more subtle. And also the identification with them is more ingrained in our mind, and therefore it will take more time to see that there is no I that is this. There is no I that is not good enough, that is not lovable. When deep-seated beliefs are loaded with fear of being excluded, of being abandoned or rejected, when they are loaded with other types of emotions, it takes more time to let go of them, to stop identifying with them. And that is okay. You know, don't have the expectations that when you do this meditation 1 time, 2 times, that you get rid of it. We need to repeat this again and again. Starting with the more superficial identifications and going deeper and deeper. And then we can bring this meditation to a conclusion. Maybe you want to abstract what worked for you and come back to that in the future. And then we can dedicate our merits that we gathered by being present here today. The merit that we gathered by listening, by reflecting, by thinking, by meditating. So much merit. And we can dedicate them to all sentient beings with the awareness and the knowledge that they are all suffering from the same as we do. They all hold on to a self in a way that a self doesn't exist. And in dependence on that, they all produce disturbing emotions, and they all create karma by doing so. And they all create so much suffering and causes for suffering. And so we can dedicate wishing that all these sentient beings might find, just as we did, a method that can help them to let go of that strong identification with the self in a way that the self doesn't exist. That they all might connect to and discover their true nature. And with that, find freedom from all their suffering and attain all the happiness that can be attained. And then I'm going to thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow when we're going to talk about how to be with adversity. And we look into anger, we look into jealousy, and what happens in the mind when they arise, how they arise, and how we can be with that situation in a different way. Okay. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Venerable.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.